Welcome to Look at This with Will Margulis. I'm Will Margulis. Let's look at this. Today we're going to be talking about how the coronavirus could potentially affect the financial prospects of the NBA. But first, before we take a look into the future, let's take a look into the past. In 1984, league revenue was $165 million. In 2019, league revenue was $8 billion. Here's a graph to represent that. In 1984, Larry Bird, the MVP of the league, was paid $1.8 million. In the 2019 to 2020 season, Stephen Curry, who was on the first year of his Supermax deal, was paid around $40 million. Here's a graph to represent that. In 1984, the salary cap for each team was $3.6 million. In the 2019 to 2020 season, that had increased to $109 million. Here's a graph to represent that. Okay, so now to discuss ticket prices, we are going to talk to our resident old man, Charles Margulis. Charles, welcome to the show.
All right, thanks.
So, describe to me your experience going to the 85 playoff series, Bucks and Bulls.
So I was with my friend Andy, who lives in Milwaukee. We were just hanging out, listening to the radio, and we heard tickets are still available for tonight's playoff game against the Bulls. So Andy said, you want to go to the game tonight? And I'm like, yeah, how much you think it'll be? And he's like, I don't know, $15-20. So we went down and we saw the Michael Jordan Bulls play the Milwaukee Bucks in the 85 playoffs. And I'm sure we didn't pay more than $15 or $20. And I'm sure we had pretty good seats. This was at the time when the Bradley Center was brand new in Milwaukee. And of course, now I think it's been torn down and they have a brand new stadium.
And what were the seeds of those teams?
It was 2-7.
And you also have some experience going to Knicks games in the 70s.
Yeah, so the Knicks won the World Championship in 71 and 73. So in 71, I was 10 years old, and that's about the time I started going pretty regularly. I mean, not a lot, but probably 2, maybe 3 games a year with my dad. My dad worked in Manhattan. We lived in New Jersey. I would go in and meet him at work or spend the whole day with him at work. And then we'd go down to the Garden. We'd take the subway down to the Garden. And my dad never had tickets for the game. We always just found a scalper, and my dad would give him $5 or $10 a ticket. This is for the World Championship, the best Knicks team in decades. And we always had good seats. The Garden is a huge stadium. So if you're sitting way up high and you're a little kid, you remember that. And my recollection is I was never scared. I never felt like we were super high up. I always felt like I had really good view of the players. So for $10 a ticket, we had good seats.
So there you have it. In the 70s, tickets for the World Championship Knicks could be as low as $5. In the 80s, tickets for a 2-7 seed playoff matchup could be as cheap as $15. For comparison, I looked up last year's Raptors and Magic series, which was also a 2-7 matchup, and found that the baseline for tickets on the Orlando Magic website was $25, so probably the lowest price you could find. This would most likely mean that those seats were nosebleeds, very, very high up. Now, according to the numbers that we have from the 2019 to 2020 season, the combined salary caps for all 30 teams only make up approximately 41% of the league's revenue. The current CBA, or collective bargaining agreement, states that players will receive 49 to 51% of the league's revenue. However, for the sake of consistency and simplicity, we are going to use the 41% figure for the rest of the calculations in this video. So we've seen how the league has grown since its inception, but where is it going to go now that we've missed almost a third of the regular season games and all of the playoffs? Let's look at the numbers. Again, according to the numbers that we have here today, only about 41% of the league's revenue goes towards the total amount of cap space between all 30 teams. If you divide the amount of days on which NBA games were played this year by the amount of days on which NBA games were played last year, you get 0.632. This means very approximately that the NBA only played 63% of their season this year. Note that this number is probably a little bit higher as some of the days that were played last year were in the playoffs, and therefore they could have had 1 game being played, 2 games being played, 3 games being played, while in the regular season for this year, since the entire year was the regular season, very many games were being played each day. However, almost every calculation in this video is highly approximate and should be taken with many grains of salt. This one happens to not be an exception. So if you take 63.2% of the league's revenue last year, you get a number that's around $5 billion. Let's assume that the league doesn't come back this year and that is its revenue heading into free agency. Based on that new revenue, the new salary cap for each team would round out at about $69 million. This means that the first year of a new max contract would be worth about $24 million. This is because max contracts and supermax contracts are based on a percentage of each team's salary cap. That number is a long shot from the $40 million that we saw with Steph. So here are the 3 graphs you've seen already representing the league's growth in revenue, salaries, and cap space from 1984 to 2019. Keep in mind that these graphs represent almost 35 years of growth. If my calculations are correct, here's what could happen in just the next year. Hopefully, it doesn't come to that. This has been Will Margulis. Thank you for tuning in.